Hello, welcome to the Inland Coalition on Aging's webinar on the Inland Empire Master Plan for Aging. Today we're going to be discussing long-term services and supports, also referred to as LTSS. My name is Elizabeth Vogemel and I'm going to be your host for today. I've served as consultant for the Inland Coalition on Aging for the last 2.5 years. As part of that role, I conducted the needs assessment, helped facilitate working groups, engaged in stakeholder and community outreach, and I'm currently supporting the forthcoming Inland Empire Master Plan for Aging that will come out in June. Long-term services and supports are important to the Inland Coalition on Aging. In 2008, the coalition was originally called the Inland Empire Long-Term Services and Supports Coalition. It was formed to advance integrated care and service delivery within the Inland Empire region, San Bernardino and Riverside counties. Since the Inland Coalition on Aging reestablished itself in 2023, it's focused its work on building the Inland Empire Master Plan for Aging. The plan consists of 5 goal areas, all of which include some elements of LTSS, Long-Term Services and Supports. Long-term care, LTC, services are vital for many residents to age in place successfully. These services help manage daily activities when independent living becomes challenging, responding to both sudden health changes and also gradual decline. Long-term care can encompass home-based services, community care, residential facilities. Collectively, these services are referred to as LTSS and are crucial safety nets for the aging and disabled populations. Our guests today are going to elaborate on what these services are, how they work, why they're so important to the community, and I'd like to welcome them to our live stream today. So I'd like to welcome Maria Kalina, Executive Director of the California Collaborative for Long-Term Services and Supports, or CCLTSS, and Bonnie Burns, Training and Policy Specialist from the California Health Advocates. Maria, would you like to tell us a little bit about CCLTSS? You're muted.
I'm so sorry. So the California Collaborative for Long-Term Services and Supports is a statewide coalition made up of a really diverse group of partners, advocates, providers, consumer groups, labor organizations, health plans, and we also work alongside a network of regional coalitions like the Inland Coalition on Aging that span over 40 of California's 58 counties. Really, at the heart of it, we're all working towards the same goal, which is promoting the dignity, health, and independence of older adults and people with disabilities. We envision and strive towards a high quality, sustainable system of care that truly supports this population and caregivers so that older adults and people with disabilities can thrive in their homes and in their communities. And we do that by focusing on 4 key areas. We work to build understanding around how the LTSS system works. We educate policymakers about the real needs and challenges that people are facing. We develop policy solutions and recommendations. And I think most importantly, we leverage our
Welcome back, everyone. We had some technical difficulties, but we're going to jump right back into it, and I will pass it off to Maria Kalina, who is telling us a bit more about the California Collaborative for Long-Term Services and Supports.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And I don't know how much folks caught as I just kept talking, but the collaborative is essentially a statewide coalition. We're made up of a very diverse group of partners, advocates, providers, consumer groups, labor organizations, health plans. And we also work alongside a network of regional coalitions like the Inland Coalition on Aging. These coalitions span over 40 of California's 58 counties. And really, at the heart of it, I think we're all working towards the same goal, which is promoting dignity, health, and independence for our older adults and our people with disabilities. We strive and envision and strive towards a high quality, sustainable system of care that truly supports this population and their caregivers so that they can thrive in their homes and in their communities. We do that by focusing on four key areas. So the collaborative works to build understanding around how the LTSS system works. We educate policymakers about the real needs and challenges that people are facing. We develop policy solutions and recommendations. And I think most importantly, we leverage our collective strength to drive meaningful policy change. It's really just about ensuring that as people age or they navigate life with a disability, that they have access to the services, supports, and opportunities they need to live with dignity and independence. So hopefully that was a helpful overview.
That was great. Thank you so much, Maria. Bonnie, may you tell us a little bit about California Health Advocates?
Sure. We're an organization that focuses primarily on Medicare beneficiaries in California and provide a lot of information around Medicare and all of the subject matter that comes up for people who are on Medicare. And of course, one of those is long-term care. And our organization supports a statewide program in California called HICAP, the Health Insurance Counseling and Advocacy Program, that provides all the Medicare counseling and information for Medicare beneficiaries and their families in California. And as part of that, we provide them with all of the materials that they use to talk about Medicare and all of the subject matter around Medicare and long-term care. And we do the training for the programs around the state. And I provide technical assistance when it comes to things like Medigap, which people buy to supplement Medicare, or when it comes to the broad topic of long-term care, which is a very broad topic. I do a lot of policy work at the state and national level. I do a lot of technical assistance for organizations around the country because one of the problems with long-term care is that it is such a huge topic and it tends to fall into two major buckets. One is the public programs that provide services and supports to people who qualify, um, usually economically, for those programs, or it falls in the private market where we talk about things like long-term care insurance, for instance. And so and we talk about caregiving, which family members provide. And so my work has focused a lot on long-term care insurance as it's evolved over the last 30 years. And today, we have products that are going through rate increases, and we're hearing from a lot of family members about the premium increases that their families are experiencing, or they're filing a claim against a policy that they bought 20 or 30 years ago, when long-term care was quite different than it is today. In addition, California Health Advocates has the Senior Medicare Patrol Program, SMP, which focuses on Medicare and Medicaid fraud. And we do a lot of work around fraud that's committed against Medicare and Medicaid beneficiaries, and work with the national program on that topic. So that's sort of a rundown of all the things that we do in our organization at California Health Advocates.
Thank you so much, Bonnie. I can't wait to hear a little bit more later on in the live stream about how you all are advocating for these supports and services. Maria, can you explain the difference between long-term care, long-term services and supports, and home and community-based services? Because we've been talking about them a lot, so it's helpful to know the differences.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. I think that all of these terms are related, but they all have distinct meanings. So when you hear the word long term services and supports, or LTSS, this is sort of the broad umbrella term, and it refers to a wide range of assistance that people might need over an extended period of time. Things like help with the daily activities, transportation, care coordination. These services can be provided anywhere. They can be provided at home or in a community setting or an institutional setting like a nursing home. When you hear the word long term care, the words long term care, on the other hand, that typically refers to more intensive, often institutional care. So that's what people think when they hear the word nursing home. It includes skilled nursing, rehabilitation, and around the clock support for those with more significant needs. And then the third term I think you referenced, Elizabeth, was home and community based services, or HCBS for short. These fall under the LTSS umbrella, but they specifically focus on services provided outside of the institutional setting. So programs like in home supportive services, community based adult services, and PACE are really great examples. The goal of HCBS is really to help people remain in their homes and in their communities rather than moving to more restrictive and more costly care settings. So just to kind of wrap that all up, LTSS is the big picture. Long-term care usually means institutional care, and then HCBS is really about support at home or in the community. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you so much. That provides a lot of clarification because those terms sometimes are used interchangeably and they're not interchangeable
They
oftentimes.
sure are. They sure are. Yeah, and we see that a lot too at the collaborative, where folks are sort of not sure which word to use for describing a service. So
Thank you. So, Bonnie, a lot of people aren't prepared for long term care, as we heard Maria Kalina describe. What are some ways that California Health Advocates help people navigate and prepare for long term care?
Well, we do a lot of public education around long-term care, and usually the term long-term care, it means different things to different people.
Mhm.
And often when we're saying long-term care, what people are hearing is nursing home, and they're hearing end-of-life care. Uh, but in reality, 40% of the people who receive long-term care services are not aged. They're disabled people who need specific kinds of long-term care. In my world, where I deal with the private side of things, people are often asking, how do we pay for this? And the reality is that unless a person is poor enough to qualify for the public programs that Marie's been talking about, then we're left with a question mark. And that question mark is that the families pay for it in a number of different ways. They pay for it by the caregiving that families provide, which in one study says that family caregivers are providing economically the equivalent of $85 billion a year in caregiving for family members. And that's an astronomical figure. And in a lot of the minority communities, that burden is falling mostly on women, but it's falling on children and the grandchildren of people who need care more heavily than it tends to fall in the white community on wives and daughter-in-laws. There's a lot of caregiving going on. So the question of how do you pay for it then evolves into, all right, well, what about insurance? And today, the evolution of long-term care insurance has moved to financial products like life-based products that have a long-term care benefit in it. And because of the failure of the standalone products that are going through so many premium increases today. So what we're faced with is insurance that most people can't buy because it's too expensive, where we've put two very complicated types of insurance together in the same product that very few people understand. And so we've left out what we call the middle market, middle income people who are looking for a way to prepare to pay for care. And there really isn't a system that those people can access that will pay for care. What has happened is that some states now are looking for ways to construct a tax paid program in their state. Washington did that. They have a long term care program in the state of Washington that people pay for with a tax on earnings. Other states have looked at that. California did and has a proposal that was submitted to the state legislature a year ago. And so around the country, states are looking for ways to address that middle market, people who are not poor enough to qualify for all of the public services, but they don't have enough money to pay for the types of insurance products that could potentially cover that kind of care for some period of time. And we're in a quandary right now about how to finance the kind of care that that middle market needs. And that's what a lot of my work is focused on right now, is looking at all of these different proposals and trying to figure out how we can come up with something. And there is a federal bill in Congress that's been reintroduced this year to construct a tax paid program. But that is unlikely to go anywhere, as it has in the last 10 or 15 years been unlikely to go anywhere. So my frustration is that that middle market that needs this kind of help so badly is stuck without a way to pay for this kind of care.
Thank you, Bonnie. You described scenarios that we encountered quite frequently when we were conducting our needs assessment for the Master Plan for Aging. We spoke to very diverse communities and held focus groups and learned about their experiences. We spoke with English and Spanish speakers, caregivers, LGBTQIA individuals, African Americans, Hispanic, Latinx, veterans, unhoused, low income individuals, people in rural areas. And we're also able to get some surveys from elders in tribal communities. And throughout all of those discussions, spoke about housing and healthcare, behavioral health and social support, Alzheimer's and other dementias, and caregiving, long-term services and supports, and how to navigate access to them was a common theme that came up. whether it be people who were needing them or people who were taking advantage of them in some capacity, but their need was increasing. Or people who were curious about what they were going to do when they needed such supports and were not aware of what was available to them. So generally, we found that community members, some were taking advantage of it, but some lacked important knowledge on these supports and how to access them and navigate them. And we shared these findings with working groups of regional professionals in the Inland Empire, so San Bernardino and Riverside counties, and experts and stakeholders, and we discussed these challenges and came up with some next steps, focusing the master plan for aging on housing and home health care, as home and health care, transportation for all ages and abilities and regions, focus on caregiving, Alzheimer's disease and other dementias, age and disability friendly behavioral health and social support, and safety and respect and equity for aging. And within these areas that we're building the master plan for aging around for the Inland Empire, the topic of long-term services and supports are woven throughout each of the topics because they're just so imperative for each of these areas of focus. So, for example, a specific strategy that was really important came under the caregiving and housing. And so one of those strategies was to ensure older adults experiencing housing transitions had access to long-term services and supports and understood what they were and what was available to them. Because sometimes people just didn't know what was available to them in the focus groups discussions. So advocating for these long-term services and supports and promoting the education and knowledge around them is so important. Maria, can you tell us about the impact of LTSS advocacy for older adults and adults with disabilities and caregivers, and give us a little background on that?
Sure. So I think first it's really important to recognize that California's state master plan for aging was launched through an executive order, which very simply directed state agencies to work with stakeholders and come up with a vision and a game plan for how we can reshape aging, right? And stakeholders were very clear in saying that, look, we don't want another report that sits on a shelf and collects dust. We need this to be actionable. We need it to drive change. But the executive branch doesn't hold power of the purse, meaning that this executive order didn't come with a budget appropriation. It didn't even have specific legislation. And that's kind of practical because you sort of need a plan and to understand where you need to shift resources. So it made sense, but advocacy and this push for investments and reforms played and continues to play a really critical role in taking the principles of the master plan and making them a reality. So, using the MPA as a springboard, our members are working to advance policies that support system navigation, like Elizabeth just mentioned, that strengthen existing programs, knowing that we have demographic shifts happening in California, that address critical workforce challenges and support our unpaid family and community caregivers. Um, as Bonnie mentioned, finding financing solutions that support middle income Californians, people who've worked their whole lives and yet they're sort of priced out of any kind of care that they need as they age. And we've made some really great progress over the past few years, from increasing access to home and community-based services through Medi-Cal and the Cal-AIM reforms, to investing in training and job quality for our workforce, expanding support for caregiving through paid family leave improvements, investing over 570 million in affordable senior housing, and I can go on. I mean, there really is a lot of ground to cover in reflecting on what's been done. But we know that there's still a lot of work to do. And I think the collaborative is focusing on three specific areas. So, one, we are working to expand, protect, and enhance access to integrated and high quality LTSS, to really ensure that older adults and people with disabilities get the care they need when they need it. And that includes, again, finding avenues to support middle income individuals who don't qualify for public programs and yet still can't afford care. To recognizing that caregivers are really the lifeblood of LTSS. We're working to strengthen the LTSS workforce by promoting fair compensation training, career advancement opportunities, and at the same time, equipping unpaid caregivers with the resources and supports they need to really care for their loved ones. Our third bucket that we're working on is advocating for housing as a foundation for well being. We really want to ensure that Californians have access to stable, affordable housing that not only supports their independence, but enhances quality of life and reduces over reliance on costly institutional care. And I would be remiss, I think, uh, just kind of expanding on this. It's important to recognize that while California's master plan for aging drives progress at the state level, and regional master plans for aging drive progress at the local level, the federal funding plays a really critical role in sustaining and expanding LTSS programs. And I'd be remiss not to highlight that the current federal budget resolution, which is up for a vote today in the House, includes some pretty substantial cuts to Medicaid, which would absolutely directly threaten access to home and community based services for millions of Californians and undermine much of the progress that we've made. So we need advocacy and collaboration now more than ever. And this afternoon, the collaborative is partnering with Justice and Aging to host a virtual session on what these cuts would mean to older and disabled Californians, and more importantly, how folks can get involved in safeguarding LTSS. That's today at noon, so I'm hoping a few listeners may be up for sharing their lunch hour with us, or simply just reaching out to get engaged. What can we be doing at the federal level? What can we be doing at the state level? What can we be doing locally to really kind of build out this robust system that we envision?
Thank you, Maria. You bring up the idea that advocacy now impacts access to resources that one has in the future,
Hmm.
which I think is really important to understand, especially if you don't need the resources now. In the future, you may. So it's important to advocate for what you may need in the future. Bonnie, can you tell us about what the role of HICAP or Health Insurance Counseling and Advocacy Program is for education and advocacy in terms of long-term care, insurance, and financing? And then maybe you could tell us a little bit about long-term care, insurance, and financing too.
Sure. Before I do that, I wanted to comment a little bit on something hopeful for middle income people, and that is the dramatic expansion of long term care services and supports in the public sector, because that is the only place that lawmakers seem to be willing to address the issue of home and community based services is the expansion through the public programs and making it easier for people to qualify for those benefits by by changing the threshold, the economic threshold that people have to meet in order to get those services. And California has always adopted the highest level to get the greatest number of people into those kinds of services. And so that's the hopeful thing that I see is the expansion at the public level that may in the future expand enough to bring some of those services to more middle income people and answer that question of how do we pay for this kind of care. The high cap programs, and there is one in every county in California, provides counseling services for people who have any questions about anything connected to Medicare and long term care. they have dedicated counselors that are trained to help people understand long-term care insurance. So if they have a policy and they're wanting to file a claim, uh, the high caps can help people understand how to do that. If they're looking at a long-term care policy, they can help them understand the long-term care benefits that are described in that policy. Or if they're having a premium increase, they can help them figure out how to make changes to an existing policy that will mitigate some of that long-term care insurance premium increase, because we want people, if they have coverage, we definitely do not want them to drop that coverage. We want them to keep as much of it as they're able to pay for, because usually this is happening to people 20 years after they bought these policies at a time when they're very likely to begin using. And so preservation of that coverage is extremely important, and the high caps can help people work their way through some of those issues. In the last 30 years, long-term care insurance has moved from a standalone product that paid for care at home, in assisted living, or in a nursing home. In looking at the way that those claims have come in, they've come in at a much greater pace than the companies anticipated, and that accounts for some of the premium increases people are having. But what we're seeing in the claims is that the majority of claims, 60% of claims, are for home and community-based services that are covered in those policies. And that's a move away from the nursing home coverage that used to be sold 40 years ago. And so we're seeing a lot of those claims for home and community-based services and many fewer claims for nursing home care. But what does tend to happen is the people who need the nursing home care tend to be the people with dementias. And those are the most expensive kinds of claims because they last a fairly long time and because their nursing home care is extremely expensive. What we've moved to today, in today's market, is the financial products with a long-term care benefit. And it's very complex, very difficult for people to understand. They're expensive, and not a lot of people can afford them. And again, that's that middle market that, the hopeful sign is that the public benefits are mimicking the claims experience of the private products, because that's where people want care. That's where it's less expensive to provide care for home and community-based services, and it's a more compassionate kind of care for the people who need it to be able to get home and community-based care and stay at home as long as they can. So that's, there's been that radical change in the financial products and fewer people able to buy them. So states are going to have to do something about financing this kind of care, because we have 10,000 people a day turning 65. And that's going to go on until 2031. That's the baby boomer population. And next year, the baby boomer population begins turning 80. And the eighth decade of life is when people are most apt to use long-term care services. And if people are using their own funds to pay for care and spending down to public benefits, it's going to have a dramatic effect on state Medicaid programs, our Medi-Cal program, and our public benefits for long-term care services and supports. So there is there is something coming that is going to prompt states to have to look at how to finance this kind of care. At the same time, as Maria was talking about, we have at the federal level some proposals to absolutely shred our state Medicaid programs at a time when they're going to be needed most. So I hope people will go to your webinar this afternoon and, and listen to that.
I can just piggyback off what you were saying is, yes, the baby boomers are aging, but right behind them are the millennials. And
Yes.
the millennials are woefully underprepared for aging. They don't own homes. They don't have savings accounts. They're not investing in retirement accounts. So, what is an issue now? What is an issue in 2030 is going to explode. It's going to be a catastrophe by 2060 when, folks that are my age are going to be older adults. So, it's, I love that there's some promise happening, especially in the state of California, and trying to sort of expand the safety net to support more people. Definitely more work needs to be done on this front and trying to figure out how do we finance this. But the problem isn't going away. This isn't like a 2030 and we're done and we can close the book and move on. The problem is going to continue to spiral. And so now is the time to do the planning. Now is the time to do the advocacy. And even behind the millennial generation, if anybody who's listening has kids that are 5 years old, like I do, they're projected to live to 100 years old. So,
Right.
Lifespans are increasing and more folks are going to spend more time within that older adult mind frame, in the older adult space. So definitely lots of advocacy that needs to take place.
What's interesting about longevity is that, yes, people can live longer, but they live longer in older bodies.
Yes.
And doesn't mean if you live to be 100, that doesn't mean that you can function like you were at even 80. So
Yeah,
we
when
have
longevity doesn't equal quality of life, right? Yeah.
yes, or ability.
That came up in one of our focus groups where we had a member who's participating say everybody's living longer, but you can't just look at the number. You have to look at the quality of life and how somebody is living. Thank you so much, Maria and Bonnie, for being here and telling us about long-term services and supports and long-term care and insurance and everything surrounding that. For those who are tuning in, thank you so much for being here. If you are of the demographic who might be using these supports and resources, hopefully this was useful. And if you're not of the demographic who's currently using it, consider advocating for it being around in the future. So when that you need these resources, they are there. And a good way to do that is to call your policymakers and to advocate for these supports, especially today since there's votes happening. So I want to thank you all for listening to the Inland Coalition on Aging's live stream on the Master Plan for Aging and Long-Term Services and Supports. If it's your first time tuning in, check out the other live streams on YouTube, introducing the Inland Empire Master Plan for Aging, discussing transportation and housing and caregiving and Alzheimer's support, behavioral health, and we also have a January live stream on equity. And if you'd like to receive updates on the Inland Empire Master Plan for Aging, please go to inlandaging.org and sign up. There's the website across the bottom. And stay tuned next month for the live stream. It'll be on general resources for those who are aging and disabled within the Inland Empire, so San Bernardino and Riverside counties. Thank you both so much for being here. Have a good day.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.